I knew something was wrong the second I saw the envelope, the kind of crisp white paper that looked expensive just to be smug. It sat there in my mailbox, waiting like a snake coiled in the dark. My name was typed in bold block letters across the front. No return address. Just seeing it made my stomach tighten. I tore it open. Violation notice, it read. The charge? A $59 fine for unauthorized vehicle positioning. My car, parked in my own driveway. I exhaled slowly. Here we go. I knew exactly who was behind. This. Judith Harper. Middle-aged, platinum blonde hair sprayed into an unnatural helmet and a grin that never quite reached her eyes. The kind of woman who treated power like a personal hobby, running the Homeowners Association as if she were the iron-fisted ruler of a petty dictatorship. Judith had been a thorn in my side since the day I moved into the community 2 years ago. I'd dealt with bureaucrats before. Hell, I was a judge. I knew how people like Judith operated. They wielded technicalities like weapons, turning rules into a personal crusade. At first, it was minor things. Grass exactly 3.5 inches high. Not 4, no front door wreaths after January. No visible trash cans before 8 a.m. I'd ignored most of it, like any rational adult. But Judith didn't like being ignored. And now she had escalated. By the time I made it back to my house, I wasn't surprised to see Judith already waiting for me. Arms crossed, perfectly manicured nails tapping against the clipboard she carried everywhere like a sheriff with a loaded revolver. "Good afternoon, Mr. Carter." Her voice was as saccharine as ever. "Judith." I didn't bother hiding my irritation. "I assume you've seen the notice?" I did. I pulled it from my pocket. "I also assume you're aware that I have every right to park in my own driveway?" "Oh, of course," she said with an almost sympathetic smile. "But per the HOA bylaws, all vehicles must be positioned within designated parking areas at least 6 feet away from the sidewalk. Your front bumper was, well, just a bit too close." I glanced back at my car, maybe 3 inches past the line. "This is ridiculous. The rules exist for a reason, Mr. Carter. You, of all people, should respect that." She tilted her head. "After all, you work in the legal field, don't you?" I clenched my jaw. She knew exactly what I did for a living. "This is harassment, Judith." "Oh, please." She gave a light laugh, waving a hand. "It's just a minor infraction. Nothing personal. Nothing personal." That was a lie. I knew it was personal, because I had challenged her before. Because I had spoken up in last month's HOA meeting when she proposed absurd new rules like mandatory beige window shades and restrictions on overly loud conversations in front yards. Because I had dared to say no. Judith Harper didn't like being told no. She smiled, watching me, waiting, enjoying this. I exhaled through my nose. Not today. I grabbed my phone, took a picture of my car in its illegal position, and turned back to her. "Enjoy your day, Judith." She wasn't expecting that. I walked inside, heart pounding with frustration, but this was just the beginning. I stepped outside in the morning, coffee in hand, and froze. My driveway was empty. I checked the street. Nothing. For a split second, I thought it had been stolen, until I saw the note. Another crisp white envelope taped to my door. "Your vehicle has been impounded due to repeated HOA violations. Contact the listed towing company for retrieval." I read it twice. She towed my damn car. I called the number. A gruff voice answered. "Yeah? I need information on my vehicle. It was removed from HOA tow." The man barely sounded interested. "Yes. That'll be $375 to get it back." My grip on the phone tightened. "Excuse me? Standard impound fee. You parked illegally." My pulse pounded. This wasn't legal. I kept my voice steady. "You don't have the authority to impound vehicles for a minor HOA violation." A pause. Then a dry chuckle. "Take it up with the HOA." The line went dead. I did take it up with the HOA, but when I arrived at their office, I found Judith waiting for me. She was already seated behind the desk, pen in hand, flipping idly through a list of community violations. She smiled when she saw me. "Oh, Mr. Carter, what a surprise." I set my hands on the desk and leaned in. "Where is my car?" "Oh, I assume you spoke to the tow company? She gave me a mock concerned frown. Unfortunately, your vehicle was flagged for multiple violations, and per our agreement with Harper Towing Services, it was removed to the impound lot. I stared at her. Harper. Her last name. I felt the first sharp click of realization in my mind. You're behind this, I said slowly. You and your family's company. She tilted her head, smile never wavering. We're simply enforcing the rules, Mr. Carter. Fairly. I could feel the rage simmering in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had seen power-hungry people before. I knew how they worked. She wasn't just going after me. She was running a racket, and I had a feeling I wasn't the only one who had fallen into her web. I stepped back, straightened my tie, and gave her a slow nod. All right, I said. Then let's play by the rules. Her smirk faltered just a fraction. I turned and walked out. Because now I was going to dig, and I was going to bring her down, one piece at a time. I spent the next hour gathering every scrap of documentation I could find: the HOA bylaws, community meeting notes, copies of previous violation notices. Not just mine, but others I'd heard complaints about over the months. The more I read, the worse it got. Judith had been running the HOA like her personal fiefdom for years. Fines were issued at her discretion. Regulations were constantly tweaked, rewritten, or enforced selectively, always in ways that benefited her and her allies. And then there was Harper Towing Services. The company had a direct, exclusive contract with the HOA, meaning Judith was funneling homeowners' money straight into her family's pockets. I had dealt with corruption before. I had sent men to prison for less than this. But this wasn't a courtroom. There were no bailiffs, no stenographers, no jury to decide guilt or innocence. This was Judith's territory, and if I was going to win, I had to be smart, so I started small. I knocked on doors. The first person I spoke to was a retired teacher named Margaret Lewis. The moment she saw me on her porch, she sighed. Let me guess, Judith. I nodded. I need to know how bad it's gotten. She opened her door a little wider. Come in. Margaret's kitchen table was covered in paperwork, HOA notices, fine invoices, letters marked final warning. She rubbed her temples as she gestured at the mess. She's been bleeding me dry, she said. I got fined for leaving my porch light on past 10 p.m., then another for unauthorized potted plants. Apparently roses aren't on the approved list. And last month, she tried to fine me for my grandkids drawing chalk on the sidewalk. I scanned the notices. Every single fine had her signature. Margaret exhaled, shaking her head. But the worst part? The towing. I looked up. They got... You too? She nodded grimly. My son visited last month. Parked on the street for 20 minutes. The tow truck was there before he even got inside. I felt my jaw tighten. How much? $450. I forced myself to stay calm. Did they give you a reason? Oh, they gave me 3 different reasons. First, blocking a fire lane, which was a lie. Then, unregistered, visitor permit. When I called that out, they suddenly decided the curb was a no parking zone, which, by the way, it never was before this year. I exhaled sharply. This was bigger than just me. Margaret, if I fight this, I asked. Carefully, are you willing to go on record? She hesitated. But then slowly, she nodded. I left her house with a folder full of documents and a growing sense of certainty. Judith wasn't just overstepping. She was running a full-scale racket. The next day, I made a mistake. I underestimated her. I was sitting in my office, sifting through everything I'd gathered, when I heard my phone buzz. A text from an unknown number. HOA inspection notice. Your property has been flagged for multiple violations. Inspection scheduled for 3 p.m. today. Failure to comply will result in further action. I frowned. That wasn't normal. HOA inspections were announced in advance. There was a process. I had barely set my phone down when a sharp knock rattled my front door. I opened it to find Judith standing there, clipboard in hand. A man beside her, one of her enforcers. She smiled, sweetly. Oh, Mr. Carter. Didn't you get our notice? I crossed my arms. You sent it 4 minutes ago. Her smile widened. Well, we like to keep things efficient. I glanced at the man behind her. Stocky, crew cut, HOA security badge on his belt, except something was off. The badge didn't look official. Then I saw it. Harper Towing Services. The bastard wasn't HOA security. He was one of her tow truck guys. That was when I knew. This wasn't an inspection. This was a message. I took a slow breath. What exactly am I in violation of, Judith? Oh, a few things. She flipped through her clipboard. Unapproved exterior modifications, potential noise complaints, improper waste disposal. I narrowed my eyes. You're making this up. Her smile didn't waver. I'd hate to have to escalate this, Mr. Carter. She gestured vaguely at her hired thug. But as you know, failure to comply could result in legal action. I stared at her. She was pushing me, testing me. And then I saw it, just for a split second, a flicker of doubt. She knew I wasn't scared of her. And that scared her. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. I wanted her to feel it. You made a mistake, Judith. She blinked. Excuse me? I leaned in slightly, just enough for my voice to drop. You picked the wrong fight. For the first time, her smirk faltered. Then she turned, plastered on a smile, and walked off. Have a great day, Mr. Carter, she called over her shoulder. I shut the door, and I knew what I had to do next. It was time to bring in an expert. I grabbed my phone and dialed. It rang twice before I heard the voice on the other end. Carter, I said, I need a favor. A pause, then a dry chuckle. Well, well, the voice replied. Didn't think I'd be hearing from you again. I exhaled. It's about an HOA. A pause. Then, laughter. Oh, this I gotta hear. The man on the other end was Daniel Vaughn, a seasoned investigator and an old friend. A former prosecutor turned private consultant. He specialized in white-collar crime, financial fraud, and, more importantly, takedowns of people who thought they were untouchable. And Judith Harper? She was exactly his kind of problem. I need dirt, I said. You always did cut right to the chase, Daniel mused. All right, tell me what you got. I laid it out for him. The selective enforcement, the absurd fines, the HOA's suspicious contract with her family's towing company, the threats, the intimidation. By the time I was done, Daniel let out a low whistle. Damn, he said. She's running a full-blown racket. I know. And I'm guessing you don't just want to fight a fine. You want to bury her. Deep, I confirmed. Daniel chuckled. All right, I'll dig. If there's a paper trail, I'll find it. Give me a couple days. I hung up and waited. Judith, however, wasn't going to sit back and let me make my move. She struck first. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of pounding at my door. Not a knock. A hammering. I groggily grabbed my robe, swung the door open, and froze. A crew of workers stood on my front lawn. They were in the middle of digging up my landscaping, ripping out hedges, destroying my lawn. What the hell is this? I barked. One of the workers looked up, unfazed. Official HOA order. You're in violation. I turned, and there she was. Judith standing at the end of my driveway, arms crossed, clipboard in hand, her usual smug smile in place. Good morning, Mr. Carter, she said sweetly. I stalked toward her, fury building. What the hell are you doing, Judith? Oh, I'm just ensuring community compliance. She gestured to my torn-up yard. Your hedges were exactly 2 inches taller than the HOA allows. And the walkway pavers? She clicked her tongue. Non-regulation color. I felt my hands clench into fists. This is retaliation. Her smile didn't waver. It's enforcement. I stepped closer, voice low. You just made a mistake. She laughed. Oh, Carter, you think you're intimidating? You don't scare me. Then she leaned in slightly, dropping her voice to match mine. You think you're going to stop me? You won't. I stared at her. This wasn't just a woman who enjoyed power. She lived for it, and she was convinced that no matter what I did, she'd win. That was when I knew. This had to end. Daniel called me that night. "You sitting down?" he asked. I rubbed my temple. "It's been a long day, Vaughn. Just tell me what you got." "Oh, I got plenty," he said. "You were right. Her family's towing company? Massively illegal." I sat up. "How bad?" "They're impersonating law enforcement, for starters. You ever notice how their security guys wear fake badges? They're designed to look like police insignias. I pulled records. She's been letting them operate as HOA enforcers, even though they have zero legal authority." I felt a slow, vicious grin form. That alone was enough to bring serious heat. Daniel continued. "But the best part? The money. I pulled the HOA's financial reports. Guess who's been funneling community funds into contractual expenses? Let me guess. Harper Towing. Bingo. She's bleeding your neighborhood dry, and the kickbacks? She's paying herself." I exhaled. There it was, the nail in her coffin. "Think that's enough?" Daniel asked. "It's more than enough." "Good," he said, "because I also found something else, something she really won't want getting out." I frowned. "What?" There was a pause, then a slow, amused chuckle. "Oh, you're gonna love this," Daniel said. "Turns out your dear Judith Harper, she's not even legally allowed to run an HOA." I blinked. "Come again?" "She's got a fraud conviction." The words hit like a gunshot. "A fraud conviction?" I repeated. "Yep. 5 years ago, she ran a similar scam in another neighborhood. HOA, corruption, embezzlement, the whole package. She was convicted, took a plea deal. Guess what that deal explicitly banned her from doing?" I grinned. "Running. An HOA. Bingo," Daniel said. "She wasn't supposed to be allowed anywhere near a homeowners association. If the community finds out, she's done." I stood pacing. This was it. Not just fines. Not just corruption. Judith wasn't even supposed to be here. And the moment I revealed it, she'd lose everything. I exhaled. "We're gonna end this." Daniel chuckled. "So when's the big reveal?" "The next HOA meeting." I smirked. "I'm going to let Judith dig her own grave." But Judith wasn't done yet. The next morning I stepped outside, and my house was covered in violation notices. Dozens of them. Taped to the door, the windows, even my mailbox, and on my driveway, a notice marked in bold red letters. "Final warning, property foreclosure in process." I froze. This was beyond petty fines, beyond intimidation. She was trying to take my home. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Across the street, Judith stood on her porch. She was watching me, and for the first time, she wasn't smiling. She was staring, arms crossed, eyes dark with something far worse than smugness. She was scared. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know how bad it was going to be. I stepped onto my porch, locked eyes with her, and smiled. Because now, she was the one in trouble. Judith stood there, stiff as a board, arms folded so tightly her fingers dug into her sleeves. The woman who thrived on control, on smug condescension and thinly veiled threats, was now staring at me with something I hadn't seen before. Doubt. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know how bad it was going to be. I turned, deliberately slow, and pulled one of the many violation notices off my door. I held it up, examined it as if I were genuinely considering the ridiculous claim, then crumpled it in my fist. I let it drop at my feet. Judith's lips thinned into a white line, and then I walked inside. Let her sweat, because tonight the game ended. The HOA meeting was packed. Word had spread. Neighbors I had never seen at a single gathering before poured into the room. The energy was different. Tense. The usual faces, Judith's allies, the board members she handpicked, looked uneasy. Because they could feel it too. Something had shifted. Judith knew it. She sat at the front of the room, posture rigid, chin lifted, desperately trying to hold on to the illusion of control. But there was a slight tremor in her fingers as she adjusted her notes. I took my seat near the front. I wanted her to see me, and I wanted her to watch what happened next. The meeting started as it always did, with Judith droning through her prepared speech, thanking the board, making a self-important comment about order and standards, as if she were running a nation instead of a suburban neighborhood. Then came the community concerns. That's when I stood up. "Point of order," I said. Judith's jaw clenched. She looked up, feigning patience. "Yes, Mr. Carter?" I held up a file, thick, heavy, filled with everything Daniel and I had compiled. "I'd like to address some irregularities with the HOA's operations," I said, "and more specifically, your leadership." The room shifted. People leaned in. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Judith's fingers tightened around her pen. "Unless this is about an actual violation, I suggest we—" "Oh, it is," I cut in, "a rather significant one." I stepped forward, placed the file on the table. Loud, heavy. Then I flipped it open. "Let's start with financial misconduct." Judith's nostrils flared. You've been funneling HOA money into your family's towing company, approving payments that exclusively benefit you." "That's embezzlement, Judith." Murmurs became outright whispers. I turned the page. "Next, your towing practices. The security personnel you've employed, they're not legal enforcers. In fact, they've been impersonating law enforcement. That's a crime, by the way." Judith's fingers twitched. I flipped another page. "But my personal favorite?" I smirked, savoring this. "You, Judith Harper, were previously convicted of fraud related to HOA abuse in another community." Silence. Then, outrage. A woman in the back gasped. "Is that true?" A man near the front turned to his wife. "She's not even supposed to be on the board," I leaned in, looking Judith dead in the eyes. "You're in violation of state regulations, Judith. You shouldn't even be sitting in that chair." For the first time, Judith had no words. She sat there, lips parted, eyes darting as if searching for a way out. There wasn't one. Not this time. Then, everything unraveled. One of the board members, a man named David Reese, stood up abruptly. His face was pale, his voice shaking. I had no idea," he stammered. "Judith, is this true?" Judith shot to her feet. "This is a smear campaign. It's public record," I cut in smoothly. David looked at the crowd, saw the expressions, darkening, the wave of fury building. I moved to call an emergency vote for Judith's removal. Judith whipped around. "You can't do that!" Another board member, one who had clearly been waiting for this moment, spoke up. "Actually, we can. It happened fast. A motion was made. A vote was called. Judith's power gone." Her mouth opened, closed. No words came, and then, like the petty tyrants I'd seen before, she made her final mistake. She snapped. "You think this is over?" she shrieked. "I built this community! You think any of you can run this without me? You're pathetic!" No one spoke. No one defended her. They just watched as the woman who had ruled over them for years unraveled completely. Judith looked around wildly. She saw what I saw. The fear was gone. She had no more power. She stormed out of the room, shoulders shaking, slamming the door so hard it echoed. It was over. The next morning, neighbors gathered in the streets, talking, shaking their heads, laughing, for the first time in a long while. People who had been afraid to even question Judith were suddenly exchanging stories, recounting years of absurdity, of fines and threats. And then they celebrated. A week later, the new HOA board rolled back every ridiculous fine, every absurd restriction. The towing contract was terminated, and Judith, she packed up and left. Rumor had it she tried to fight her removal legally. Didn't go well for her. Turns out judges don't take kindly to frauds. Irony's a beautiful thing. As for me, I sat on my porch that evening, watching the neighborhood finally breathe again. I sipped my drink. Peaceful. And then a voice called out, "Margaret, from across the street, grinning. "You ever think about running for HOA president, Carter?" I barked out a laugh. "Not in a million years," she chuckled. "Well, if you change your mind, we'd vote for you." I shook my head, smirking. "No thanks, I didn't need the title. I had already won.